mechanical failure on the interstate was a tragedy waiting to strike, and the hidden steering defect in the Academy van was completely invisible to a casual glance. To the arrogant martial arts manager aggressively pacing the garage floor, the quiet mechanic's steadfast refusal to grant immediate safety clearance was nothing more than a money-hungry scam designed to steal their budget. He aggressively demanded a cheap cosmetic fix so his team could leave on schedule, completely unaware that the quiet man standing before him was not just a typical local mechanic, but a former Delta Force sniper extensively trained to operate with absolute precision in high-stress environments. Marcus instantly recognized the critical difference between a minor annoyance and a lethal threat. He was about to protect his young apprentice and systematically dismantle a toxic bluff, not with explosive physical violence or loud threats, but with the cold precision of undeniable mechanical evidence. The battle lines were drawn in heavy steel and dark oil, and the devastating true cost of arrogance was finally about to be laid bare. The van, when parked and idling on the concrete floor, appeared sound. There were no visible leaks, no structural fractures, and no glaring mechanical failures. It was a ghost in the machine, a phantom fault that only reared its head when the vehicle was pushed under specific dynamic conditions. The jarring arrival of Cole, a black belt and the Academy's newly appointed transport manager, shattered the focused atmosphere of the garage. Cole strode through the open bay doors with an air of unearned authority, his posture projecting a dismissive arrogance that set Mateo on edge and caused the apprentice to step back from the bumper. Cole was clad in form-fitting athletic gear, carrying a gym bag slung over one shoulder. He demanded unquestioned clearance for the transport van, his voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. He insisted that the reported steering issue was merely a cosmetic misalignment, a minor problem blown out of proportion by cautious mechanics trying to pad their bills before a trip. When Marcus calmly explained the necessity of a sequential diagnostic process to find the root cause of the failure, Cole scoffed, a sound dripping with disdain. "You guys are unbelievable," Cole spat, dropping his gym bag onto a diagnostic cart with a disrespectful thud. Two other shops looked at it and said it just pulls a little on the highway. "It's a van, of course it pulls. I know exactly what you're doing. You see the Academy logo on the side. You know we have a tournament this weekend, and you think you can just milk us for every dime. It's just an alignment. Put it on the rack, straighten the wheels, and give me the keys. We have a schedule to keep, and I don't have time for this ridiculous song and dance." Marcus did not react to the insult. His face remained a neutral mask, a void of emotion he had perfected during years of operating in high-stress environments across the globe. He wiped his hands again, his eyes locking onto Cole with an intensity that the fighter failed to register. "An intermittent steering drift under load is not a cosmetic alignment issue," Marcus stated, his tone flat and factual, devoid of the defensive anger Cole was trying to provoke. If a component in the steering geometry is failing under pressure, a simple alignment will not fix it. It will only mask the symptom until the component fails at highway speeds. We do not clear vehicles that present safety hazards. We find the root cause, and we fix it. That takes time, and it requires a systematic approach. Cole laughed, a harsh sound. He reached into his gym bag and pulled out a thick envelope filled with cash, tossing it onto Marcus's workbench with a triumphant smirk, declaring the diagnosis to be easy money for anyone who wasn't running a scam. "Listen to me, grease monkey," Cole sneered, stepping into Marcus's personal space, trying to use his physical size to intimidate the mechanic. "I'm offering you a wager right now. I'll bet this entire repair bill, right here in cash, that you cannot prove the existence of any serious fault without taking this thing out on the highway and driving it like a maniac to try and force a failure. And I'm not letting you take our primary transport on a joyride just to prove a point. You can't find it here on the floor because it doesn't exist. It's an alignment. Fix it, take the easy money, or I'm taking the van right now." Cole's demeanor was a blatant challenge, a calculated provocation designed to steamroll them into submission. He openly dismissed Mateo's initial findings, pointing at the apprentice and laughing at his notes. Cole insisted on a quick fix, so the martial arts team could depart on their schedule without delay. His eyes darted nervously toward the tools whenever Matteo approached the passenger side of the vehicle, and he paced restlessly, shifting his weight from foot to foot. He hovered closely, his body tense, displaying a rigid anxiety that contradicted his verbal bravado. He kept checking his watch and glancing at the specific area of the suspension, urging them away from the structural mounts. He offered no history of recent maintenance, insisting the van had driven perfectly until a minor bump the week prior. Marcus, unbothered by the posturing display, picked up his clipboard and documented the challenge, the wager, and Cole's explicit refusal to authorize a dynamic road test on the work order. He knew that engaging in a battle of egos with a man like Cole was useless. The only truth that mattered lay hidden deep within the steel and rubber of the vehicle sitting before them. Marcus turned back to Matteo, his voice cutting through Cole's continued complaints with quiet authority. "We are not doing a road test. The client has explicitly refused it, and it introduces unnecessary variables. We will find the fault right here, on the floor, using static load simulations. Set up the hydraulic rams. We start eliminating variables right now." The pressure in the shop mounted as the departure time drew nearer, transforming the garage into a crucible of controlled testing. Marcus and Matteo worked methodically, refusing to bypass safety protocols despite Cole's constant presence and his stream of mocking remarks. They set up a series of static stress tests, systematically eliminating potential causes one by one. They checked the power steering pump pressure under load, applying resistance to the steering wheel, while monitoring the fluid bypass valves. They measured the deflection of the tie rods using a micrometer, verifying the metal retained its factory rigidity. They inspected every millimeter of the sway bar links, torquing the bolts to ensure the bushings were fully seated. Matteo, finding his footing under Marcus's silent guidance, began recording weight distribution patterns on a diagnostic tablet, typing in the raw resistance values for each quadrant of the chassis. As they worked, Matteo noted a subtle, inconsistent load reading that seemed to shift unpredictably when the van's front suspension was subjected to simulated cornering forces using the hydraulic floor jacks. It was a tiny anomaly, a fraction of a degree of deflection that the previous shops had missed, but it was there, hiding in the raw data. Cole paced the concrete floor, mocking their slow approach, demanding they stop wasting time with computers and just align the wheels. He insisted the suspension was fine, his voice rising in indignation whenever Matteo focused his attention near the passenger side steering geometry. The tension in the garage thickened. Marcus watched the interplay between the apprentice and the manager, his sniper's eye catching the microscopic physical tells of a man trying to divert attention. Cole's jaw clenched whenever Matteo checked the mounts. Marcus realized that clearing the van without finding the root cause risked the client's safety, his shop's reputation, and Matteo's foundational development as a professional. The central dilemma crystallized in Marcus's mind. He had to choose between accepting Cole's cash for a cosmetic fix, intentionally sending a hazard onto the interstate, or continuing the investigation without a guaranteed outcome. The tests continued. The wager sat on the bench, the cash mocking them. The deadline tightened, the clock ticking toward the moment the van was scheduled to leave. But despite the mounting pressure, no specific fault had yet been reproduced. No proof had been captured, and no superiority had been proved. The battle of wills was locked in a stalemate, the true nature of the danger still hidden deep within the steel. Matteo picked up the tablet again, deciding to run a secondary sweep of the lateral load sensors, determined to isolate the fluctuating variable before the time ran out. He crawled underneath the chassis, adjusting the placement of the hydraulic ram by a few inches, seeking a better angle to test the resistance of the heavy metal frame. The garage remained suspended in a tense standoff, with neither the mechanic nor the manager willing to concede ground. Cole tapped his foot impatiently, checking his phone and sighing loudly, projecting an air of bored irritation to mask the subtle tension in his shoulders. Marcus stood back, his eyes moving methodically across the exposed underbelly of the transport van, calculating the physics of weight transfer and metal fatigue. He knew they were close. The data was whispering a truth that the steel was trying to hide. Matteo emerged from beneath the vehicle, his face streaked with grease, and nodded to Marcus. He locked the hydraulic valve into place, setting the stage for the next phase of their static load simulation. The machine hummed, ready to push the geometry to its limit. They were preparing to strip away the assumptions and force the hidden variables into the light, leaving no room for excuses or shortcuts. The real diagnostic work was just beginning, and the cost of failure was too steep to ignore. Cole watched them prep the equipment, his smirk faltering slightly as the reality of their meticulous process became impossible to dismiss. The easy money on the workbench seemed to lose its power in the face of the unyielding steel and the quiet determination of the two mechanics. They were not playing a game. They were searching for a fracture in the foundation, and they were not going to stop until they found it. The overhead fluorescence buzzed, casting a glare over the repair bay. The Academy van remained suspended off the concrete floor, an immovable monolith guarding its mechanical secrets. The digital clock mounted on the cinder block wall ticked away the hours before the martial arts team's departure deadline. Matteo, his work shirt stained with grease, wiped the glass screen of his diagnostic tablet. He pulled up the telemetry logs they had gathered from the vehicle's sensor network. Despite the pressure and Cole's relentless hovering, the apprentice was finding his professional footing. Under Marcus's silent protection, Matteo had systematically eliminated the most obvious causes for a steering drift. The tie rods were straight and within tolerance. The power steering pump was maintaining pressure. The primary alignment geometry, as Cole had insisted upon earlier, was dead center. Yet the troubling data glared back at them from the illuminated screen. Matteo's finger traced a jagged line graph that spiked unpredictably in the dense cluster of recorded data. It was an anomaly that made no logical sense on a static vehicle, an inconsistency that shattered Cole's simplistic narrative of a cosmetic misalignment. Cole, pacing behind them, leaned over Matteo's shoulder. He tapped the hardened screen of the tablet with a thick finger. "What are you even looking at, kid?" Cole sneered, his voice echoing in the quiet shop. "You're staring at meaningless squiggles because you don't know how to turn a wrench. The tie rods are fine. The pump is fine. I told you. It's just the tires tracking in the highway grooves. Stop trying to invent expensive problems. Give it a basic toe adjustment, sign off on the paperwork, and let me get this van on the road. We are burning daylight here." Matteo flinched at the proximity and the tone, his confidence momentarily threatening to derail his focus. But before he could fold under the pressure, Marcus stepped between them, his movements fluid and devoid of posturing. He didn't raise his voice, yet his presence established a physical barrier between the manager and the apprentice. Marcus looked down at the tablet, processing the telemetry data that Matteo had isolated. "Explain it to me, Matteo," Marcus instructed softly, his voice an anchor in the middle of the storm. "Ignore the noise. Tell me exactly what the raw data is showing you right now." Taking a breath, Matteo pointed to the specific spikes in the load telemetry. "It's the dynamic weight transfer, Marcus," the apprentice explained, focusing on the hard science of the mechanics. "When we apply simulated lateral force using the jacks, mimicking the forces of a high-speed lane change, the steering angle sensor registers a subtle, uncontrolled drift. But it's not consistent. If it were a bent tie rod, the deflection would be constant under any load. But this only happens when weight shifts to the passenger side of the chassis. Something buried in the mounting geometry is physically yielding under extreme pressure, and then snapping back into place when the load is removed." Cole let out a groan of frustration, throwing his hands up in a display of exasperated disbelief. "Weight transfer? Yielding geometry? Are you actually listening to this garbage?" Cole demanded, turning to Marcus. "He's just throwing out technical buzzwords to cover up the fact that he has no idea what he's doing. The van sits perfectly level. It drives fine around the block. You guys are trying to sabotage our tournament schedule to squeeze a few extra bucks out of the Academy's budget. It's pathetic, and I'm not going to stand here and let you scam us." The shop's landline phone rang, a sharp, piercing sound that cut through the tension. Marcus walked over to the workbench and picked up the receiver. On the other end was Mr. Davis, the senior owner of the Martial Arts Academy and the man who signed the lucrative fleet maintenance contract that kept Marcus's shop afloat. Cole had texted the owner, complaining about the delay and framing Marcus as an opportunistic mechanic holding their transport hostage. Davis's voice was tight with stress, demanding to know why their primary vehicle was still on the lifts when the team needed to depart. He reminded Marcus of their long-standing business relationship and the financial value of the Academy's account. Davis made it clear that missing the regional tournament was not an option, and he expected Marcus to honor the timeline. If the van wasn't cleared in the next hour, he would pull the entire fleet contract and take their business to a competitor across town. The conversation was a direct test of Marcus's resolve. The financial cost of losing the Academy's contract would be severe, threatening the survival of his independent shop and Mateo's apprenticeship. He listened to the owner's demands, acknowledging the tight schedule without offering false promises. He explained that a structural anomaly had been detected in the steering geometry, and that releasing the vehicle without identifying the root cause was a safety risk he was unwilling to take. Davis, influenced by Cole's earlier reassurances, dismissed the concern, insisting that Marcus was overcomplicating a routine alignment. The call ended with an ultimatum: clear the van or lose the account. Marcus hung up the phone and turned back to the repair bay. The stakes had escalated from a petty disagreement with a toxic manager to a critical threat against his livelihood. Cole stood with a triumphant smirk, knowing he had leveraged the Academy's ownership to force the issue. He pointed to the alignment rack, expecting Marcus to capitulate to the financial pressure and prioritize the business contract over the abstract telemetry data. Mateo watched his mentor closely, understanding the gravity of the phone call and the severe consequences it carried. The apprentice hesitated, his hand hovering over the diagnostic tablet, wondering if his complex data analysis was worth the destruction of the shop's primary income source. Marcus bypassed the protesting Cole and focused his attention on the silent bulk of the Academy van. The clock on the wall indicated that they were less than 2 hours away from the final deadline. The data clearly indicates a structural yield under dynamic load, Marcus stated, his voice low but carrying an undeniable finality that cut through Cole's ranting. The suspension components appear sound when at rest, which is exactly why the previous shops missed the fault. They didn't push the geometry to its breaking point. We need to create a controlled environment that mimics the forces of a loaded highway maneuver. We need to definitively isolate the exact structural component that is failing before we can even begin to discuss a repair. Cole's face contorted in anger. He snatched his gym bag off the diagnostic cart, the zippers clinking in the sudden silence. "You are out of your mind," Cole snarled, his voice dropping into a threatening register. "I am not authorizing any more science experiments. I am the designated transport manager. You are going to put the van on the alignment rack right now. You are going to straighten the toe, and you are going to hand me the keys, or I swear to God I will personally ruin this shop's reputation. I will make sure you never get another fleet contract." The threat hung in the oil-scented air, an attempt at professional extortion. Mateo swallowed hard, his eyes darting between the angry manager and his stoic mentor. The young apprentice knew exactly how heavily the shop relied on the steady income from the Academy's fleet. A public fight with Cole could be devastating to their small business. Yet, Marcus didn't blink. He simply reached out and took the diagnostic tablet from Mateo's hands. He reviewed the jagged load data one final time, confirming his apprentice's troubling findings. "Mateo," Marcus said quietly, ignoring Cole's explosive outburst. "Go to the heavy equipment locker. Pull the synchronized hydraulic platform lifts and the laser deflection sensors. We are going to build a custom multi-point stress rig right here on the main floor. We are going to physically lock the chassis down, and we are going to apply isolated lateral pressure directly to the passenger side steering geometry until the hidden defect is forced to reveal itself." Cole exploded. "Did you not hear a single word I just said?" he roared, stepping toward Marcus. "The owner just called you. The tournament departure is in less than 2 hours. You are ignoring a direct order from your biggest client based on a theory from a kid who barely knows how to hold a wrench. Give me the keys right now." Marcus turned his head, his calm eyes locking onto Cole with an intensity that made the fighter take a step backward. The mechanic's posture hadn't changed, yet a dangerous aura radiated from his silent form. "I heard exactly what you said, and I heard exactly what Mr. Davis said," Marcus replied, his voice a soft rumble. "And you need to hear what I am saying. I am officially refusing to grant safety clearance. The shutdown is now permanent and heavily documented in our official system. The van does not leave this shop until we locate and repair the structural failure. If you disagree, you can arrange a tow truck to remove the vehicle, but it will not leave under its own power." Mateo hurried to the equipment locker, unlocking the heavy steel doors and dragging out the heavy hydraulic rams. He retrieved the laser deflection sensors, carrying the delicate optical equipment in padded cases. The physical labor served as a temporary distraction from the crushing anxiety of the situation. He was no longer just an apprentice learning the ropes. He was an active participant in a high-stakes standoff that could define the future of the shop. He laid the equipment out on the concrete floor, organizing the high-pressure hoses and the heavy steel mounting brackets. Marcus joined him, his movements methodical and efficient. He instructed Mateo on the precise placement of the anchor points, ensuring that the lateral force would be applied exactly where the telemetry data indicated the weakness. They bolted the heavy steel brackets to the shop's reinforced concrete floor, creating a rigid anchor for the hydraulic rams. They positioned the laser sensors on magnetic bases, aiming the red beams at specific points along the steering rack and the suspension mounts. The setup was a complex piece of engineering, designed to recreate the exact physics of a high-speed lane change without the lethal risk of an actual road test. Cole watched from the periphery, his arms crossed tightly, his phone in his hand. He alternated between glaring at the mechanics and aggressively typing messages to the academy owners, building his case against the shop. The construction of the stress rig took 45 minutes. Every minute that ticked by drew them closer to the academy's absolute deadline. The physical exertion in the hot garage left Mateo drenched in sweat, his hands shaking slightly as he tightened the final hose fittings. He connected the data cables from the laser sensors to the diagnostic tablet, initializing the calibration sequence. The screen displayed a grid of green dots, indicating that the sensors were locked onto their targets and ready to record any microscopic movement. "The rig is secure," Mateo reported, wiping his forehead with the back of his sleeve. He looked at Marcus, seeking final confirmation before initiating the test. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. The data he had gathered, the conclusions he had drawn, were about to be put to the ultimate physical test. If the laser sensors showed no deflection, if the steering geometry held strong under the simulated load, Cole would be proven right. The shop would lose the contract, and Mateo's professional judgment would be discredited. But if the data was accurate, if the hidden flaw revealed itself, they would be preventing a catastrophic failure on the highway. Marcus nodded, stepping back from the vehicle and checking the perimeter of the testing area. He verified the hydraulic lines were clear and the safety locks were engaged. The battle lines were irrevocably drawn. Marcus had committed to the costly shutdown, explicitly trusting his young apprentice's hard data over the demands of an influential client. Cole was furious, his flawed plan derailed by Marcus's unyielding integrity. The wagered cash still sat untouched on the workbench, a symbol of the arrogance that had brought them to this point. The core mystery remained unsolved, hidden deep within the cold steel of the undercarriage, waiting for the immense pressure of the hydraulic rams to force it into the light. Mateo grabbed the heavy steel control valve, bracing himself for the kinetic energy transfer. He locked eyes with his mentor, waiting for the command to proceed. "Engage the primary rams, Mateo," Marcus ordered, his voice a low rumble that cut through the heavy silence of the shop. "Take it slowly up to the maximum calculated load limit. Watch the laser deflection sensors carefully. Do not blink. Do not exceed the structural threshold we calculated. We are looking for the failure point, The precise moment of yield, not uncontrolled destruction. Maintain control of the pressure. Matteo slowly engaged the hydraulic valves, his hands steady despite the immense pressure of the moment. His eyes locked onto the glowing digital pressure gauges as they began their steady climb. The massive industrial machinery groaned, a deep, bone-rattling sound of building pressure that vibrated through the concrete floor and resonated in the chest of everyone present. It was a raw display of mechanical force, applying extreme stress directly to the van's thick steel undercarriage. The digital readouts on the diagnostic tablet climbed rapidly, numbers flashing higher and higher as the pressure built to unprecedented levels. The high-powered laser sensors painted bright red dots across the passenger side steering geometry, tracing the microscopic flecks of the heavy steel components. For a long, agonizing minute, the geometry held. Cole smirked, crossing his arms tighter, preparing to declare victory. Suddenly, the illusion of safety shattered, with a sharp, loud metallic crack that echoed off the high concrete walls like a high-caliber gunshot. The hidden defect finally revealed itself under the simulated highway strain. The sudden violent sound made Cole flinch physically, his confident smirk instantly vanishing as the physical reality of the situation crashed down upon him. The heavy van shifted slightly on its blocks, a terrifying indication of what would happen if the suspension gave way while in motion. A jagged hairline fracture in a critical, load-bearing steering rack mount, a compromised structural flaw previously completely obscured by normal suspension tension when the vehicle was resting safely on the ground, gaped wide open under the simulated lateral load. The sensitive laser sensor instantly registered a massive, unacceptable deflection in the steering geometry, the red dot dancing wildly off its calibrated mark. It was the exact location of Cole's rushed, undocumented suspension repair from weeks earlier. Marcus moved in closer, illuminating the fractured metal with a high-intensity inspection light. The physical evidence was undeniable. The high-grade steel bolt securing the critical mount had been over-torqued and completely stripped by an amateur hand, weakening the cast metal bracket until it finally cracked under the unyielding strain of the simulated turn. The physical proof was now undeniable, reproducible on demand, and terrifying in its real-world implications. If that weakened, compromised mount had failed at full highway speeds while carrying the fully loaded martial arts team and their heavy equipment, the large transport van would have suffered a violently sudden loss of steering control. At 65 miles per hour, the driver would have had absolutely no ability to correct the trajectory. The resulting high-speed rollover crash on the crowded, unforgiving interstate would have been catastrophic, a perfectly preventable tragedy waiting for the worst possible moment to strike the unsuspecting passengers. Cole stood frozen in place, his aggressive, domineering posture crumbling into dust in the face of the undeniable mechanical truth. The blood drained entirely from his face, leaving him pale and wide-eyed, as the horrifying reality of his direct negligence was laid bare under the unforgiving fluorescent garage lights. His elaborate bluff, built on intimidation and arrogance, was systematically dismantled in a matter of seconds. It had not been dismantled by physical force or threatening posturing, but by cold precision, scientific diagnostic methodology, and hard, irrefutable mechanical evidence. The thin veil of plausible deniability was violently stripped away, leaving him completely exposed. He had actively tried to force a fundamentally compromised, lethally dangerous vehicle onto the public highway, risking the lives of his own team and students, solely to cover up his incompetent amateur mistake and save his fragile pride. The immediate aftermath unfolded over the next several agonizing hours with the sobering, heavy finality of a hard-won victory. The Martial Arts Academy completely missed their scheduled departure window, their meticulously planned tournament logistics thrown into chaotic, expensive disarray by the absolutely necessary structural repairs. The delay was public, undeniably disruptive, and entirely Cole's fault. Marcus quietly absorbed the countless unbillable hours spent on the difficult, tension-filled diagnosis and the dangerous, physically demanding setup of the heavy diagnostic rig. It was a significant business cost that the independent shop owner willingly accepted to ensure the ultimate safety of the vehicle and its vulnerable passengers. He did not ask Cole for the wagered money that still sat on the bench, nor did he demand a forced, hollow apology. The stark reality of the situation and the crushing weight of the exposed truth was punishment enough. Cole, completely stripped of his unearned bravado and suddenly facing the severe, career-ending consequences of his dangerous actions, was forced to place a humiliating, tense phone call to Mr. Davis and the Strict Academy owners right from the shop floor. With Marcus and Mateo listening silently in the background, Cole had to explicitly and publicly disclose his dangerous, undocumented shortcut. He stumbled over his words as he explained exactly how his attempt to save a few dollars on a proper repair had nearly cost them everything. He was fully exposing his own mechanical incompetence and his toxic, aggressive attempt to bully a professional mechanic into covering it up. The harsh consequence handed down by the furious Academy management over the speakerphone was swift, uncompromising, and unforgiving. Cole was immediately removed from any control over the Academy's transport logistics, pending a full internal review of his employment and decision-making history. His absolute reign over the valuable transport fleet was permanently shattered in an instant, and the Academy management demanded absolute transparency and professional oversight moving forward. The heavy silence that followed the termination of the phone call was thick with the weight of consequence, and the stark, sobering realization of the massive disaster that had been so narrowly averted by a mechanic refusing to compromise. The combative focus within the hard-working repair shop finally shifted from conflict and argument to methodical, professional resolution. Mateo, having successfully provided the crucial telemetry data that directly led to the life-saving discovery, took the absolute lead on the demanding structural repair process. His professional confidence was permanently solidified by the intense experience of standing firm against immense pressure and proving his data right. Under Marcus's watchful, approving eye, the young apprentice methodically extracted the shattered metal bracket, carefully navigating the compromised surrounding frame to avoid causing further structural damage to the van's complex undercarriage. Mateo meticulously prepped the damaged mounting surface, spending an hour carefully grinding away the scored, jagged metal and aligning the new geometry perfectly to ensure a flawless fit. He then installed a brand-new, factory-certified heavy-duty mount, taking his time to properly seat the thick polyurethane bushings and torquing every single heavy steel bolt to the exact engineering specifications without taking a single shortcut or rushing the critical process. Once the critical new mount was securely installed and inspected, Mateo did not simply clear the vehicle and move on to the next job in the bay. He understood that repairing the physical damage was only half the process. Verifying the integrity of the repair was paramount to his new professional standard as a mechanic. He independently and carefully reset the massive hydraulic diagnostic rig, reattaching the heavy chains and positioning the hydraulic rams exactly as they had been before. He ran the complex stationary stress test a second time, systematically verifying the complex repair with the exact same rigorous precision they had used to find the hidden fault in the first place. He applied the maximum simulated lateral load, watching the telemetry intensely on his diagnostic tablet. This time, the heavy laser sensors remained perfectly steady, showing absolute zero deflection under maximum simulated load. The structural integrity of the heavy van was undeniably restored to factory-safe conditions, proven by the very same data that had revealed the flaw. The Martial Arts Academy management, deeply shaken by the terrifying reality of the near miss and Cole's shocking negligence, instituted a mandatory two-person safety check policy for all future transport maintenance, completely altering their internal logistics. There was no grand reward for the shop. Marcus quietly absorbed the unpaid hours required for the complex diagnosis and the delayed repair. He had risked the Academy's business to enforce a hard line on safety, and the true victory was measured in a disaster prevented, not in a lucrative contract. The aggressive domination that Cole had brought into the garage had been entirely replaced by precise teaching and undeniable mechanical proof. Marcus watched quietly from the shadows of the busy garage as Mateo, his hand still covered in fresh grease, confidently signed his own name on the final diagnostic record, legally certifying the massive van as safe for heavy highway transport. The profound professional transition was finally complete. The young apprentice had firmly earned his professional agency and hard-won authority through meticulous work and unwavering integrity. Marcus deliberately filed Mateo's signed sheet alongside his own highly organized records in the heavy steel filing cabinet, a permanent testament to the boy's growth. He slowly walked over to the main workbench and picked up the thick envelope of cash Cole had thrown down hours earlier in his arrogant wager. The money remained untouched. Marcus simply placed the heavy envelope in the outgoing mail tray to be returned to the academy. The shop returned to its quiet rhythm, the heavy burden lifted, and the true cost paid in full. The commitment to doing things the right way without shortcuts or compromises would remain the foundation of their work long after the aggressive client had been forgotten.